Welcome to The Criminologist, the podcast dedicated to educating and entertaining our listeners. We bring you subject matter experts from around the world and share the latest and greatest evidence-based practices and interventions to help individuals desist from a life of crime and delinquency. This podcast avoids stereotypes and biases in favor of the lived experiences of those we can best learn from. Now, please welcome the host of The Criminologist, Joseph Arvidsson.
Hello, and welcome to episode 158 of The Criminologist Podcast. Happy to have you all with us today. This week, I am so very excited to be sharing my recent conversation with Veronica Glueck. Veronica is a program supervisor with the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. Now, prior to arriving in the Lone Star State, Veronica was doing great work in New York. I always enjoy talking to folks who have that sense of adventure, if you will. I have noted in the past that my journey as a corrections practitioner led me from Minnesota to Florida and then back to Minnesota. So I appreciate the risk-taking spirit that Veronica has displayed in her vocational choices. Veronica is also an active member of APPA, the American Probation and Parole Association, which we will talk about shortly. But as a reminder, the American Probation and Parole Association is a great resource for listeners. I encourage you to please check them out. In fact, I will leave some relevant links in the program description of this episode. I know, for example, that APPA has their big conference coming up in New York City this coming August of 2023. So if you are a member or if you're not a member, regardless, you're going to want to check out that resource. And now, joining the Criminologist Podcast all the way from Austin, Texas, please enjoy my conversation with Veronica Glueck. And I will see you all on the other side. Well, welcome to the show, Veronica. Why don't we kick this off by you introducing yourself to the audience? Just tell us a little bit about yourself, generally speaking, sort of those milestones in your career, and then we'll do a deeper dive on some of these really awesome topics here today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm Veronica, and I started my service career as a residential counselor at a homeless and detox shelter. And then I became a PO, a probation officer in New York State, Sullivan County. And then I transferred to Westchester County as a probation officer. And to those assignments, I was assigned to multiple caseloads and stuff and had some awesome experiences and opportunities there. And then I relocated to Texas about 2 years ago. And now I work for the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. And I've been there, I think, over 2 years. So, yeah.
Let's talk about your experiences in New York for a little bit. We spoke real briefly offline before this conversation started, talking about our mutual interest and participation in APPA, the American Probation and Parole Association. One thing I love about that organization is it brings people together from all over the country, all over North America, I would contend. But have you noticed, talk about, for example, when you were working in New York, what was that culture like around, say, for example, evidence-based practices? Because I found this varies wildly from jurisdiction to jurisdiction.
So we were in New York State. Their motto is evidence-based practice. From the time you do the probation academy, everything is based on evidence-based practice and what they coin as what works to rehabilitate individuals and meet them where they're at. So they really wholeheartedly embrace evidence-based practices. And I was part of the New York State Probation Officers Association as well over 10 years. And that was something we as an association also promulgated as evidence-based practices along with the states and the county probation departments.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I'm here in Minnesota, and we're another one of those more, I guess you could say, progressive states when it comes to evidence-based practices. Now, you noted you made the switch to Texas. First of all, what prompted that change from New York to Texas, and what's that experience been like?
I hate the cold weather. And every year I was like, I'm moving to Miami. When I started out, I was 22 when I started out as a PO in New York. And every year, every winter, I'd be like, I'm moving to Miami. I'm moving to Florida. I'm going to federal probation. I need to be in warmer weather. So then when COVID hit and we had to do that whole transition from, we were in New York, so we were locked down. And I worked for Westchester, who had the number one COVID case or patient one or whatever they called it at the time. And they were locking everybody in their house. And you couldn't, I remember working from home as a PO, and you could only go to the supermarket on your lunch hour. And the line wrapped around because they were only open 8 to 5. And I'm like, I still work during the day. So I was just like, I can't stay in my house all this time. So, and it's perfect time, the county. And it was also strange because the county and the state were financially, what are we going to do because of COVID? So it wasn't sure if they were going to be able to keep people or not. Everything was up in the air during that time. So I said, I'm going to take this opportunity. They were offering an incentive for people to leave or retire early. So I said, all right, I'm gone. I'll go to Texas. I looked in California and Florida, interviewed out in California and stuff, took some exams, and I wound up in Texas.
For what it's worth, Veronica, I'm from Minnesota here, and I went to university, got my master's degree here in Minnesota. And like you, I could not stand the cold weather, and that prompted me. I was actually still in graduate school working on my master's thesis. We had actually already theses back then, kids, when I was hired by the Florida Department of Corrections. So you're not the only one, the only probation, or at least in my case, it was future probation officer, to flee to warmer climates. So now I guess I'll ask that same question that I asked to New York. What has your experience been like with the Texas Department of Criminal Justice and their culture around evidence-based practices?
I've been blessed because with Texas, they're also about evidence-based practices and really being proactive and progressive in what they do. Because the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, they oversee the prison system and the parole system. And then they also, we have a adult probation division as part of Texas Department of Criminal Justice. They have some amazing rehabilitative programs that they offer both in the community and in the prison system. So it's been awesome to just learn about all of that they do. They have some programs that they work with a lot of vendors, and they do a lot of contract programs. So it was totally different from New York's experience to here, getting adjusted to that.
Well, you were right saying you were blessed. Yeah, it sounds like both of those jurisdictions really adhere to evidence-based practices, or as you said, sort of the what works mentality. I know you're currently in a role as program supervisor. Maybe walk our listeners through, what does a typical day look like for you now, Veronica, in your current role?
Well, I thought when I left as a PO, when I gave up my caseload and stuff, I thought, I'll have more of a typical day, right? That people who work regular 8 to 5 does without a caseload. But no, that's not the case. Every day is something different. It's a new challenge, a new problem to solve. So basically, my program supervisor position right now is with the Community Justice Assistance Division, which is the adult probation division of Texas Department of Criminal Justice. So they oversee the funding for the community supervision departments in Texas. So we have one of the programs that the TDCJ offers, Texas Department of Criminal Justice, is substance abuse and cognitive behavioral programs in the prison system. So, or what they'll do is they'll bring people in who are on probation into these programs. So the intermediate sanction facility or the substance felony punishment facility, and they'll get their cognitive or substance abuse treatment in the prison system, and then they'll release with some aftercare or some kind of specialized supervision some of the counties offer, or sometimes specialty courts. So every day we work to make sure we grant access to these treatment opportunities to the probationers throughout the state of Texas.
I love that you're doing that work in the institution, in the prisons as well. Particularly, you mentioned cognitive behavioral interventions. What has that experience been like? I was speaking with some other individuals, professionals in the field the other day, and we kind of get on a tangent about our frustrations around implementation. And I kind of made the point that it's not as if we don't know what to do. We've been talking about these evidence-based practices, or some people refer to them as core correctional practices, core correctional skills. And I made the comment, it's not as if we need to build a better mousetrap. We've built the mousetrap. The issue is in getting staff members to use the mousetrap. What's that experience been like for you? And has it been different working in a prison setting versus working in a community setting with probation and parole officers?
So when I was in New York working for Westchester County, my commissioner there, he tried for, I believe it was 20 years, to get a good COG program implemented in the department, make the referral seamless and, coming. The referral process was always the struggle. And then also, getting the officers are so busy with their regular tasks, to facilitate a group or organize that, it could be difficult with the time and the constraints with that. So when I was in Westchester, we finally, he had assigned me to the services unit, and we were part of the cognitive facilitator team, and we implemented the COG program there. And we still struggled with getting referrals, and we had to be creative. You kind of want to refer those individuals who are maybe pending a violation, or even the ones that are going through specialty court, kind of give them an incentive. So if they complete this program, maybe they'll get some kind of, reduced sentence, or, have to report less, those sort of things. So we tried to find the benefits to promote the program so we could get the referrals. And here in Texas, I do more of an administrative function. So I don't work directly with the probationers. I work with the probation officers who are referring people to these programs that are in the prison system. So they submit the applications to our division, and we review them, and then we provide the information to our vendor who schedules them. So one thing here in Texas is it's a very popular program with the judges. So you have to have the judges on board. You have to have the probation departments on board, the officers. So anytime you do any of these programs, you have to find the support within the people who are going to be referring them. So you're, whether it's the defense attorneys, the district attorneys, the judges, or the POs. And you really have to have a good program, because you want to make sure people are being sent to a program and they're actually going to make some changes. And then it helps with the rehabilitation and the recidivism rate.
It sounds like you have addressed some of those struggles with implementation, particularly around, you noted, fine-tuning the referral process, for example. I'm curious, where is Texas as far as, let me back up. We, again, here in Minnesota, we have really put an emphasis on cognitive behavioral interventions. And we also realize sometimes we talk about it as far as the dosage principle, that the client really needs to be exposed to a lot of these core correctional skills and cognitive behavioral interventions to really and seriously move that recidivism needle. So we're saying to staff members, hey, listen, it's great that you're getting your high-risk client into a thinking for a change group or decision points or whatever other off-the-shelf COG skills programs are out there. But, and here's my question, has Texas started to look at maybe, again, augmenting that classroom experience with training your probation officers or prison caseworkers on, you're actually the intervention as well. You can do some of these one-on-one cognitive behavioral interventions in addition to making these program referrals.
Yes, I think just not only speaking just for Texas, I think nationally, a lot of probation departments are doing this. I don't know if you're familiar with the whole EPICS thing, where you would have to do the EPICS tapes and then somebody would read them and give you feedback. So a lot of the probation departments, and especially in Texas and New York where I was, we had motivational interviewing, like it was required, it was part. And then to do skill-based stuff like role-playing when you're in the interview with somebody, to kind of, so that when they're in those situations outside of like a COG group or some type of structured group setting that they're doing because it's a court mandate, they can practice those skills in the interview with the probation officer and get some feedback. So I think that has part of that training is in the PO training when they first come on, and then they have to redo it. And I was a trainer in New York, so that was one thing that we had to do too, is we built in those skill-based role-playing. How do you interview, role-play? How do you give feedback and do that motivational interviewing?
Exactly. And you also spoke of the need to instill into the practitioner that there's an integration that takes place with all these practices and skills we're training you on. For example, yes, you're trained in motivational interviewing. You're likely trained in some type of risk assessment. And maybe you even train a cognitive behavioral skills. But to the client, it's all about how can you in the moment integrate all of those things. So even though we train them in silos, the expectation is that you apply them holistically.
And sometimes it's like a struggle as an officer. You get all this information and it's like, how is this supposed to look, sound like? And then you're like, am I doing this right? Am I doing more harm than good? If at this time I wanted to do a role play with somebody, but they're, going through a really hard time, you kind of want to do the trauma-informed thing first and then do the role-playing, the coping stuff. And then you have to do your referrals and then make sure they're following the conditions of probation. And some departments have really large caseloads and some have really small. So the quality might look different depending on the resources you have and the way your departments are set up.
I've lost track, Veronica, how many times I've kicked off a training by addressing the probation officers and telling them, you have a really hard job. And I mean it, because as you were just stating, there's so many expectations and you wear so many different hats that even when you're trained up on these skills, it's hard to know which skill to apply at any given moment. You were just talking about trauma-informed practices. I could add that to the list as well. And it's hard for the practitioner in the sort of heat of the moment, if you will, to know how to apply, when to apply, or what skill to apply at any given moment there. Yeah. In my research, I wanted to ask you this. Share some of your experience with us as a virtual skills coordinator. What's that all about?
So the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, the Community Justice Assistance Division, which is the division I currently work in, they hold an annual skills conference, which is a virtual conference. So they've been doing it before virtual was a thing. So you see how progressive that my division is, because they require, for our standards for probation officers in Texas, there's a certain amount of training hours they have to have every biennium. And so the Community Justice Assistance Division wants to help the probation departments to make sure that we can provide free training. So this way it would help meet their training hours. So I had just came to the division and they were looking for somebody to help with this skills training. And I volunteered because I do have experience organizing conferences and trainings. And I was a trainer before. So they had asked me if I volunteered to do it. So I did it. I was working with one of my coworkers, Val Lopez, who she is a program specialist who audits or gives evaluations to the probation departments in Texas. So we were co-coordinators, and we organized a skills conference. We hosted it on Zoom, and we had, I believe it was 24 workshops from all different topics, from human trafficking to drugs to officer wellness to the coach versus referee with Dr. Lovins. So we had a host of things. Domestic violence was a big thing too. We had David Adams come, who is from Emerge, and he does a phenomenal job with domestic violence, batterer treatment intervention programs. So we were able to give very good training to the CSCDs. We recorded it so they could watch them and get their hours throughout the year if they didn't attend live.
You mentioned the coach versus referee content that Brian Lovins has put out. I absolutely love it. He's been on the show talking about it. I've seen him train folks live on that same topic. Can you maybe expand on some of that? Not to put you on the spot, Veronica, but it is a great message that Brian sends out. So I'd be remiss if we didn't maybe give a shout out to Brian and talk about his, I guess, more of a philosophy of that role evolving from one of containment and surveillance to one of, well, coaching essentially. But go ahead, take it away.
Yes, so it does make sense. I think for officers who are your veteran officers, reframing, I mean, sometimes people think, oh, I've been doing that for years, and I'm not called a coach, right? I'm not called a referee. I'm a PO. Like, that's what I am. Just thinking about, as human beings, we all do better sometimes if we're coached. There are times where you need to be a referee. But the thing is, how do you find that sweet spot between the coach and the referee, and how you can't expect perfection with people, especially people who are sentenced, have these long probation supervision terms. Like, they have 7-10 years, and I'm going to exclude the sex offenders from that because, some states have very long supervision periods for sex offenders, which is understandable. But more so, a lot of people can self-correct. And how do you get them to self-correct? And it's by coaching them, being that sounding board. And a lot of times, when I was an officer, the probationer would put me down as their emergency contact because they had nobody else. So when you have people like that you're supervising, how does that come out when you need to coach them, right? Versus being a referee, because they probably had referees all their life. And this is why they're sitting across the table from you. So I think really thinking about how do I apply my coaching skills, and when do I need to call in for those referee skills? And more so, you should probably using more coaching skills than the referee. And if you think about it, that's how humans operate. Mm-hmm. We do better when people encourage us versus, telling us what we should be doing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I liked about it, among other things, as if nothing else, it reminds us that we're all humans, and regular listeners of this podcast know that one of my themes, if you will, is tearing down that wall, that sort of binary us versus them approach that we take. Or I have a colleague that calls it the otherism. It's like, yeah, they're the other folks, like our offender or our client or whatever. But it's like, well, they're us. We are they and they are us. And everything you said about coaching applies to that, right? We would respond to that type of philosophy better than a referee just telling us when we step out of bounds, do something wrong, file a probation violation warrant, that type of thing. So, yeah, if you haven't heard it or are not aware of it, maybe I'll leave a link in the episode description to Brian's paper, or I know he's even done YouTube talks on that, or I could even link my podcast that he was on talking all about it. I know I alluded to this previously, but let's talk about APPA, the American Probation and Parole Association. I know you've got experience not just as a member who attends the workshops, but you serve on committees. Talk about APPA, and if there's folks out there listening who are not aware of this great organization or on the fence, sort of give an endorsement for that fine organization for those probation officers.
They're a very hardworking group, whether it's the executive team over there, the volunteers, the elected board. They really promote probation and parole and community supervision nationally. They have tremendous opportunities, whether it's training, networking, volunteering to be on the board, to really learn about the profession, give back to the profession. One thing is networking is a big thing of mine. I like to connect people. If somebody's looking for some program or something, I met this person, this might be a good connection. So the organization provides that at a worth of people because there's so many people involved in it. The membership is very small for the benefit. I think it might be $50. I don't know. I pay a couple years at a time. But you could be a member of a committee. So I've been a member of the technology committee for many years. So we have vendors on that committee from different technology companies. So you learn about, what stuff they offer. We have other officers on there, executives on there, some college, like university, academic individuals involved. So you're able to, learn about this stuff and then really be an advocate for it if it's your thing, like technology and supervision. That's like something I'm very passionate about, on how do we leverage technology to help us with supervision and help us with staffing as well, because that's the big thing going on too with the staffing shortages. And so the organization provides a host of things. They provide phenomenal trainings. You always feel like you're rejuvenated after you go to one of their trainings. Then they do these miniature trainings throughout. So it's a great organization to come and be involved in. And they've been doing some more legislative work on the national piece, and that's really great to see that they're really promoting it. And, with anything, you have to take it as there's good in something and there's bad. You might not agree with everything everybody does, no matter where you work or where you're involved in, but that's the whole thing. You should surround yourself with all different types of viewpoints and take what you need.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Even from my evidence-based practice bias, I like attending the workshops and networking because I'll say it reminds me of the other aspects of the job that I sometimes forget, sitting in this chair, preaching the gospel of core correctional skills, and then forgetting again about the other related topics around safety, for example, or like you just said, technology, or those sort of requisite things that the day-to-day working probation officer still has to do. So that's what I like about it. And as you said, there's a lot of committees you can get involved in. You referenced the tech committee. I'm on their international relations committee. It's a great way to meet people. And now we're all kind of spoiled because of the pandemic. We all know what Zoom meetings are. But it's nice to keep in touch with those folks. And as you said, it really does rejuvenate you when you come out of those conferences. If you're down in the morale, if you will, of the day-to-day job, when you attend those conferences, it really does boost your spirits. I couldn't agree more. Veronica, I love your infinite mindset, as we call it. When I've got you back on the show in a year or 2 years, what do you think we might be chatting about? Look into your crystal ball. What do you see the future of probation, or what hot topics, what might we be chopping it up over when I have you back?
I'd love to see where the technology of like more departments, agencies, just nationally embracing technology rather than fearing it, and the cost that goes with it. A lot of the fear happens to be with, people are tracked, your employees are tracked, your staff's tracked, there's a timestamp on everything. it doesn't leave a room for error, basically. And the same thing on the supervision side. So I'd love to see that. Loving where there's a lot of work being done on officer wellness and self-care, different departments doing peer coaching type of things for their officers, having crisis intervention responses. So like if you have a caseload and somebody on your caseload has overdosed or passed away, people don't realize what that has to do with the person supervising and how they respond to it. Everybody's like, oh, some people are like, it's just a job, just leave it. But you supervise some of these people for a year, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. You know their families, their children, their attorneys, whoever that you came in contact that they have contact with, and just taking that home with you or really sitting with it, that could be difficult for some people. And so seeing that a lot of departments and agencies are looking into how do we help officers with this crisis, especially with the fentanyl stuff going on. A lot of officers need that outlet and that support. And I think that's great that we're headed there, and hopefully that keeps that as strong as, everything else goes with it.
Could not agree more with those things. And it's great to hear that, again, you're bringing that dynamic outlook and not sort of resting on, well, we figured this out. There's a lot of other challenges out there. And as a vocation, we need to continue to grow in all those aspects. Veronica Glueck, thank you so much for joining us here on the Criminologist Podcast. I can't wait to have you back on the show and or crossing paths at a future APPA event.
It was great. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Veronica. Take care. A Texas-sized thank you to Veronica Glueck for joining us this week on the Criminologist Podcast. I love hearing different perspectives from practitioners, of course, around the world, but obviously here in the United States as well, as we know that gaining different perspectives really helps us in our implementation efforts. So thank you again, Veronica, for sharing your expertise with us all this week. As promised, I have left the link for my podcast interview with Brian Lovins, in which we talked about his philosophy on the evolving role of the PO and how it is morphing, or should be morphing, from that of a referee to that of coach. So check out that episode when you get a chance. I have also left links for the American Probation and Parole Association in the description of this podcast. As noted, they have their big conference coming up in August of 2023 in New York City. So please check that out. And finally, I want to remind everyone that my colleague and I, Nicole Kimberly Staley, have officially unveiled our TIDES program model and are inviting any and all interested parties to reach out to us for more information. Our TIDES program model is a holistic approach in supporting marginalized individuals on their pathways to change. TIDES, the Trauma-Informed Desistance Program model, is a custom-designed, strength-based approach that incorporates trauma-informed, evidence-based, and desistance principles to support justice-involved individuals leaving a life defined by criminality. If you or your agency are interested in how to synthesize the current knowledge base around trauma-informed care, desistance from crime, and the risk needs responsivity model, please reach out for details. Back next week with a fresh episode. In the meantime, you may contact the show or reach out to us through our website, theparagongroup.llc.com, for training or presentations as to evidence-based practices, core correctional skills, or of course, the topic of desistance from crime. If you have questions or comments as to this podcast, feel free to contact the show via our email at thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. That's thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. Remember to follow us through our Facebook and Instagram pages at The Criminologist Podcast. New fun images are being added all the time to those feeds. You don't want to miss out. The Criminologist Media Group is also on Twitter. Give us a follow at Crim Media Group. That's CRIM Media Group. You may also connect with me, Joseph Arvidsson, on LinkedIn, and follow both the Criminologist Podcast and the Paragon Group on our LinkedIn pages. Hey, lastly, if you've not already done so, check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Criminologist, for additional content as to the themes of this podcast. And if you believe in what we're doing on the show, if you're part of the movement, spread the word, tell a friend or a coworker or a colleague about us, ask them to subscribe to the podcast, and of course, do so yourself if you've not already done so. And always remember, folks, there's no them, there's only us.
And sometimes it's like a struggle as an officer. You get all this information, and it's like, how is this supposed to look, sound like? And then you're like, am I doing this right? Am I doing more harm than good? If at this time I want to do a role play with somebody, but they're, going through a really hard time, you kind of want to do the trauma-informed thing first and then do the role playing, the coping stuff. And then you have to do your referrals and then make sure they're following the conditions of probation. And some departments have really large caseloads and some have really small. So the quality might look different depending on the resources you have and the way your departments are set up.
The Criminologist Podcast is a production of the Paragon Group, LLC. For speaking engagements, interviews, program design, or training opportunities, please visit us at theparagongroup.llc.com. If you enjoyed the show, you can find more content and videos on our YouTube channel, The Criminologist. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Both the Criminologist Podcast and the Criminologist channel are brought to you by the Criminologist Media Group. Be sure to give us a 5-star review, and thanks for listening.